What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to the Struggle to Strength podcast, your source for real life application on how to turn your struggles into strengths in all things mind, muscle, and money. Trav, you've been doing cold water exposure, right?
Yes. Yeah. I've been doing sauna in the morning followed by cold shower and been seeing crazy benefits, lower blood pressure, help with like anxiety, that sort of thing.
That's awesome. And something that I've been wanting to do. So we have this guy, Paul, coming on today from Cold Water Effect, who's going to talk to us about how to get involved in cold water therapy. Because I was under the impression that it just had to be freezing and it had to suck.
Same. Yeah.
But
There's
apparently
a
it doesn't.
way.
There's a better way. Like it does. You don't have to listen to the cold bros on Instagram and just get into 35-degree water and hate yourself the entire time. Like there's actually a really good process and the water doesn't even have to be that cold. So we have Paul coming on today who has done like in the past 740 days, he told me that he's done cold water exposure in Lake Michigan, in general for the past like 700. Like he's done 700 out of 740. Days. Yeah. And he does almost all winter. He just gets into Lake Michigan, but he realized that there was a lot of benefits to this. And he also realized that there was a lot of like poor information going around the internet about how you're supposed to do it. And you don't have to listen to the cold bros. So Paul is coming on today to explain to us how to get started with cold water therapy, what the best like options are, and then how like the specifics of what the water temperature can be and how long you have to wait while you're in there. And also like your pre-cold water exposure routine and your post-cold water exposure routine. Because that was another thing that I didn't really think of was like what happens before and after.
Totally. It's crucial.
Yeah. So having like a preparation on the front end and then a like post cold water exposure routine on the back end really brings us all together. So I'm really excited, y'all. Tune in, like stay tuned, grab your notepads. There's a lot of really good action items in this one. So yeah, Paul's going to tell us exactly what to do. So we'll see you guys inside.
I'm super stoked for this episode. I have just started dabbling in cold therapy myself without like a ton of information, ton of knowledge about it. And definitely like as part of a kind of holistic approach to some things, I've seen some great like benefits. So I was super stoked to talk to you and learn about this.
Hell yeah.
Great. I'm excited.
Yeah. So let's kick it off then. And, you were kind of getting into like your brand story almost of like how you got into cold therapy in the first place. Tell us a little bit more about like who you are and how you got here, man.
Right. So my name's Paul Koepnick. I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I got into this in a bad place. My background's in medicine. So I was in veterinary school at the University of Illinois. And the competition, the amount of work, the amount of stress that was just going on with this very competitive higher education, right? Where you're fighting for every grade. It started taking this mental toll on me where I was getting depressed and anxious and anxiety, panic attacks. And then I was working for the Department of Homeland Security. I was hand selected, one of 30 students internationally to work at Plum Island, which is this top secret laboratory for infectious animal diseases and control and transmission. So studying like bioterrorism and how we quarantine and the public health in regards to epidemics and pandemics and with animals in our agriculture system. So that at the top of my game, but hidden away was me being depressed, insecure. I was toxic. I was just over coping in my relationships with alcohol and just so insecure about myself. That was just driving me into this depression and anxiety. And I ended up a year before I graduated, I failed out. I was in my clinical rotations, failed out of veterinary school, and I lost everything. And I had this huge identity crisis where I was supposed to be this doctor. I was at the top of my game, and I had absolutely nothing. And trying to figure out who I was as a human being back at the bottom, it was terrifying. and I was trying to get help in my mental health because I started going deeper into depression and anxiety. I ended up getting medicated and having a manic episode. And I ended up getting in some trouble with my behavior, and it went viral. Like, it was the worst day of my life, the worst moment of my life. I got arrested for taking a car just so I could get home to see my family. And because of my behavior and my mental state, it went to this viral place. And that's what I identified to that I'm a failure. I am now a criminal in the eyes of everyone, even though it was just a ticket. But because the story was made around me, that's the story that I decided to tell myself. And it led me down to this depression. I ended up homeless, lost every relationship that I had, and ended up suicidal, to where I didn't want to live because, like, I had nothing to live for. I didn't know who I was. And so I remember being at I was living out of my car in Madison, Wisconsin, and I was at this lake, this campsite, and I was at the lowest point of my life and contemplating just the deepest and darkest thoughts. And I said, you know what, let's just go take a shower, and, let's just see, after you take a shower and get cleaned up, let's see what happens. And the shower was cold. And when I was taking a shower, my mind shut off, and I started kind of thinking about different things that I could do. And all of a sudden my mood started getting better. I'm like, whoa. What was going on? And I remember reading something about Tim Ferriss, about these Silicon Valley guys, becoming more productive, and their metabolism, and hacking fitness with cold water immersion and cold showers. And so I was like, let's just make a run at this, and let's just see what happens. So I started about 5 years ago, just taking cold showers every single day, and things started to improve. Things started just kind of, I was getting out of my own headspace and kind of getting into, just taking it one day at a time. And I was just, the thoughts and the happiness I was coming over, I started making little bits of progress, to the point where I started turning things around. And that's when I really started getting serious about cold water. I'm like, maybe there's something to do with this. And I was sick of my life, and I'm like, I'm going to manifest and create the life that I want, and I'm going to create the story myself. And I'm going to use cold water as the vehicle, as the catalyst to get there. And so that's when I started going into Lake Michigan. I moved to Milwaukee, and I started going to Lake Michigan every single day throughout the winter. And one day turned into 600 really quick. And in that time, I got married. I went from cleaning out gutters with a leaf blower to an executive of one of the biggest real estate companies in Wisconsin, in just a short year or two of time. And so it was really kind of this practice of going in and doing the hard thing. And then I went and I learned this all from Wim Hof. So I have advanced study Wim Hof, and I started taking this and wanting to learn how to do it faster and optimize it and be more efficient with it. I'm learning how I could take this stress that I was going through and pairing it with the physical stress of cold exposure. Because if I can adapt to a physical stress, I should be able to adapt to a mental stress that I'm making up in my own head. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of like the backstory of how it all went on. And now I decided to do it all over again. So left my job of this corporate real estate and started teaching this to other people, and started just rebuilding and putting my own spin on this world of cold exposure and the things that I've learned with doctors at the Mayo Clinic and Medical College of Wisconsin, and what we're doing in the future with with students and academics and how putting this into student organizations to help out kids' mental health in general.
That's awesome, man. Well, Travis, well, you were going to have a question. I was too. What's your question, man?
Yeah.
Sure.
Should we say it at the same time and see if it was the same?
Yeah.
question?
Ready?
Yeah.
1, 2, 3. What are the most
Why cold exposure?
I was going to ask.
Damn it.
Dude,
so many times I feel like we have a question. It's like the same question. So that's why I was wondering.
I was going to ask, it's kind of similar. I was going to ask what your favorite or the most surprising benefits of cold exposure are. So it's kind of the same question.
Sure. I think the most surprising benefit of cold exposure is it gives you access and it gives you the key to unlock your subconscious and unlock those processes. And all beginning with that first initial dip. What a lot of people don't talk about is you're putting yourself in a fight or flight state, which actually starts shutting down your prefrontal cortex, that part of your brain that is responsible for all the mind racing, for all the worry, the anxiety. It stops it in its tracks immediately. All you can think about is being in the cold, because that's an evolutionary hardwired response to stress. It's the good stress, because we used to have, every day we thought about getting eaten by, a saber-toothed tiger. And when you're faced with a saber-toothed tiger in the wild, you're not thinking about, how much is my mortgage? Like, you're not thinking about that, because all you're thinking about is how to survive. So you're kind of hacking into your brain and telling it to stop with this worry, where your fears actually end up disappearing. So you get into this space of pure mental clarity, and then you learn how to adapt to bring back that mental space in a reset. You're totally reset. So once you go back online, you have nothing there. So you're totally clear with what you want, and you're in line with your subconscious that you just accessed, but you don't have all these racing thoughts. So you really can go in and do the work.
I think even the concept of getting comfortable in that fight or flight state, it widens your window of tolerance to be able to think logically and clearly under those fight or flight circumstances. And while you were talking, I was thinking about an experiment that they did with Travis Pastrana. You guys know Travis Pastrana? He's the dirt bike guy, first guy to ever do a double backflip. So they put him in a rally car. And keep in mind, this is a guy who, for those of the listeners who don't know, he's a Red Bull athlete, extreme sports athlete. I actually met his mom on a plane once, way back in the day. But
they're like Burlington. They're like Burlington people.
I think they are.
They are. Yeah, he's Vermont.
Yeah. So he grew up just riding dirt bikes. So he grew up like constantly putting himself into high stress situations, but being able to think really clearly. You think about this with most extreme sport athletes who are comfortable upside down, like 20, 30 feet in the air, and have the wherewithal and the proprioception to understand where their body's at in space, think clearly, logically, to get themselves to land back on their feet, back on their wheels, whatever it may be. But they did this experiment with Travis Pastrana where they put him in a rally car, and I think he was going for a world record long jump. And it was like something, I'm going to butcher the distance, but we'll just call it like 127 meters or something crazy. And they had him hooked up to all sorts of medical equipment to measure like his heartbeat and his blood pressure and all sorts of things. And the one that I remember, the metric I remember was his heart rate. And his heart rate was, I think it was like 80. Like as he was putting his suit on, as he was putting his gear on, it was 80. As he was getting to the car, it was 80. As he turned the car on, he starts driving towards the ramp, it was 80. In the middle of the air, it was 80. It landed, it was 80. And then he got out of the car and it spiked to 160 to celebrate. And he had such control over his heart rate and every like system in his body during that time that he could control that. And so this is kind of what it sounds like to me, is like the first time you get into a cold tank, you're like, holy shit. And it spikes your heart rate through the roof and you get that like massive fight or flight response. But I imagine the longer you sit in it, the more you're able to control it. The longer you do it, the more you're able to control it. And I imagine that translates to other aspects of your life.
100%. 100%. And I was just speaking about this at the National Alliance on Mental Illness. Did a big presentation on how we can use this type of cold exposure to transform, some of these stress-related problems. Because everything that I was experiencing, I was just kind of tying back to stress and fear and the physical responses that we have to it. And when you put yourself in fight or flight and then are able to adapt to it and activate some of these the opposite reactions, so the parasympathetic nervous system for rest and digest, you can actually start reprogramming and reconditioning a subconscious process in your reactions to a stress response. So you're literally changing the way you are perceiving something in the external world. And then by doing that, you are able to kind of influence your behavior inside of that to be able to rise above it. Right. And so you see with consistent practice with this, that your body starts to do things automatically in a stressful situation, to where you know what it feels like to be like, oh, this is stressful, but you're not thinking about it. Right. It's just happening automatically. And that is a really powerful transformation because you're not afraid to go do things that you're normally afraid of, or your body's telling you, oh, this is fine. This is just normal. This is what we do. This is what we do now.
You're kind of like raising your tolerance.
Yeah.
By like doing something that's, right? Doing something that's like maybe foundationally or fundamentally more difficult than, stressful situation X, like for your brain, then you're increasing your brain's resiliency, tolerance to these stressful situations at like a foundational level, so that, on the front end, you notice less panic or freakouts, or like you don't feel as out of control when these situations like happen to you, basically.
Yeah, dude, I think about this all the time. I mean, every human, especially those of us who suffer from mental illness, like every human has been in a situation where they get into a conflict or some sort of tension with another individual. And when that gets brought up, instantly your window of tolerance is like at risk, right? So you might go outside your window of tolerance. You're like, oh shit. And that might be the same feeling that you get the first time you enter into cold water, where you're like, oh shit. But as you get better at having difficult conversations with people, as you get better at being able to prepare and brace for those challenging conversations, it turns into less of an oh shit and more of like a, okay, here we go. And it turns in from less of a reaction into more of a response, where you're not thinking illogically, you're not thinking in a high stressed, emotionally driven state. You're absorbing information, and especially when it's an important conversation between two people or a group of people, you're able to perceive that information better. You're able to obtain perspective from other sides better. But like the first time it happens, you're like, holy shit, this water's cold. And eventually it just turns into water and you can think a little bit more clearly. So it makes sense. Even on like the most basic foundational level, it makes perfect sense. But how does this actually impact your systems? Like, we know that there's data to show that this is beneficial for your internal systems, right? You mentioned something about smoothing muscles and blood cell count. Like, how does this impact that?
Right. So, well, let's take the cardiovascular system. So they just came out with a study a couple of weeks ago. I read it on Yahoo that the number one cause of cardiovascular distress is stress, emotional stress. That pressure, the inflammation that comes with that, the constant stress levels of those in your blood. That's one thing. So learning how to manage this stress or reframing the stress, learning how to control the responses is going to be highly beneficial for the cardiovascular system. Not only that, you have, it's an exercise for your smooth muscles and circulation. So when you're constricting those blood vessels in your extremities, in your body, and you're shunting everything to your core, and then learning how to rewarm it, you're actually exercising the smooth muscles around your blood vessels. So you're better able to regulate that blood pressure because those muscles are becoming stronger. So you don't have to use your heart muscle as much.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
So you become more.
Wait, hold on. Pause.
Mm-hmm.
So can this then help you lower your blood pressure if you have kind of like chronically like high blood pressure?
If you do it in a correct way, in a focused way that focuses on, that's where contrast therapy kind of is popular, because you're going from a hot to a cold to a hot environment where you're expanding those blood vessels and then constricting them, and then expanding them and then constricting them. So
that's
you can end
what
up.
I've been doing. Yeah, that's what I've been doing, and my blood pressure went from being like a little bit over good to being like perfect.
I gotta start doing that.
Right.
And
I was doing like 20-minute sauna in the morning, followed by like a 3 to 5 minute cold shower. And I did that every day for like months on end. I'm traveling right now, but I'm still doing it. But it's like the number one thing, and I was like meditating and stuff too, but it's like the number one change in my routine, and my blood pressure is like healthy now. So I've got to imagine that's amazing. Has a lot to do with it. Yeah.
It's really hectic. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to ask if this, like when you were explaining kind of the concept of like drawing blood to your core and then letting it go back to your extremities, I don't have great blood flow to my hands and my feet. Like I've broken my wrists and my ankles plenty of times. Is this something that would help my body improve its effectiveness at getting blood to my hands and feet? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, you can. So that's where I kind of coupled this in with the breath work and the visualization practices of what you're doing inside the water, because where your focus goes, blood flows, right? And so you can really, with your mind back online and really focusing on where that cold is going and where blood is flowing. They've done studies on this where you can increase that circulation to a specific area of your body just using your mind. And this is just another part of that visualization of how do we go into this high stress, right? And then be able to visualize where we want to focus in for the health of recovery, right?
No male listeners should doubt that you can send blood flow to an area of your body with your mind. Okay? Because I don't know if you remember being like 14, but it was almost impossible to not send blood flow to certain areas.
Yeah, we call them NRBs.
Yeah.
Every guy listening knows what an NRB is. All the girls are like,
stop
what's an NRB?
Thinking. Stop thinking.
Ask your boyfriend what an NRB is.
Yeah.
But that's a really powerful exercise. So what I'm curious about, like, can you walk us through, like you go into a cold exposure. What's your thought process? What's this kind of look like? What are you thinking of kind of almost from beginning to end?
Right. So when I first start going in, it's first I want to prime up my body, right? And so I use a really short breath work that's similar to the Wim Hof method. I don't know if you guys know Wim Hof method. Breath work.
Savage.
It's kind of it's called the 10-20-30 method, where you're taking 10 big deep breaths, expanding that upper chest, and then just letting that breath kind of fall out. Doing that 10 times, and then on the 10th breath, you're expelling the breath and then holding it for 10 seconds. Round 2 is 20 big deep breaths. Exhale and hold for 20 seconds. Then 30 big breaths, exhale for 30. It takes like 2 minutes, but you'll start feeling your arms start tingling. It starts alkaline, turns your body into alkaline state. Let's say that. It's because you're breathing out so much carbon dioxide, you're breathing out that acid in the blood, and you're making it more basic. which is increasing that pH, which makes your nervous system start acting faster and start responding. So you kind of start waking up the body, start preparing for stress. You want to match kind of the energy that you're going into. Then I'm going into the water in a very slow and controlled way. When you're going to a body of water like Michigan, especially when it's really cold outside, and the risk of cold shock and hypothermia. Those are the two big dangers of cold exposure. So your body is going to want to take these big breaths in, this gas reflex. And we found that we want to counteract that. So as your body is naturally going into fight or flight, I'm priming my body with a long, slow, extended breath out. And that comes from a study by Kelly McGonigal at Stanford, who was working with heart rate variability. And that in meditative practices, that if you're able to extend the restricted airstream of exhale for over 10 seconds, that your heart rate variability went up, which means your heart rate is just dropping because you've activated the parasympathetic nervous system. You're able to keep that mind online. So as I'm immersing myself in the water, I'm going 3, 2, 1, long extended breath out to activate the rest and digest parasympathetic nervous system, so that as my body is starting to hit with this fight or flight, I am counteracting. So I don't panic. So I don't go into this respiratory panic where hypothermia can set in, cold shock can set in. So as that takes about 2.5 minutes to your body to be able to come back into a normal breathing rhythm of just this extended breath out. And then I'm just taking a normal, big extended breath, so gentle breath in. I'm trying to really consciously control my breath out. You can't think of anything else while you're in there. So all you really want to do is take a long, slow breath out and just focus on your exhale. And then I'm sitting in and I really have like big 3 things that I kind of go over. And the first one is after I get over that breath work, it's never give your pain a voice, right? Our thoughts and what we think have power, and cold exposure and stress, it's the effects that you get from it are defined by what you say and what you think to yourself. So what you experience in the stress actually has really physiological differences in it. So we want to keep our self-talk into something positive. You have to be creating a positive experience. So I do that through gratitude. So while I'm sitting in that water, breathing out, I'm saying thank you, or reliving a really positive experience, like the proudest moment I ever could think of, or petting my dog, and reliving that and letting that feeling wash over me. That also starts bringing your heart rate down, and then all of a sudden your body starts to adapt. And then I'm sitting in there that moment for 5 to 10 minutes. You can do it in about 3, but from 3 to 10 minutes, I'm sitting in that water. And then I'm kind of letting that big screeching voice out of my brain. And I'm waiting to listen for that small inner voice that's, pushing me into the right direction. So that when that voice usually tells me, okay, it's time now to get out, like we've reached that moment, then I'm getting out, and then I'm rewarming myself up with some different types of qigong and breath work, to really start activating that muscle again, to really start rewarming me from the inside. So we're doing a activation, and then we're counteracting with the opposite, and then we're activating that stress response again back up to rewarm us up.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. I like the strategy. And it's interesting. You said like your body hears everything your mind says. I believe that to be true, like to an insane level. And when you say your body tells you that you're ready to get out, I think the first thing that comes to most people's minds who have never done this before is that feeling of you get into cold water. It's like, oh shit, get out. But it's not that. It's okay. You've achieved peace. Like you are calm. You are tranquil. You've done the thing. Like you've done it. You can go now.
Yeah. Right. Your body. Yeah, you're exactly right. Because there's that first voice that tells you, I don't want to do this. You can stay at home and go to bed, that it's going to be cold and this is not going to be fun. That's the voice that you want to say, no, I'm doing this anyway. Thank you for your input, but I'm going in and doing what I know that's going to be beneficial for me in my life. And you're really working on telling that voice to shut up and that you're more powerful than it. That voice is always the big screaming voice. That's the ego coming through. And it's the process of getting through that voice. And then there's the secondary inner voice that is just very quiet. And it's usually that one that tells you, hey, you should be doing this, but you're not. And okay, that's fine. But it's usually just a whisper. And I usually, it comes in a part of the piece where you're in that meditative space that says, okay, all right, you've reached what you needed to do today. And, it's, get out, or, whenever you're ready. It's a gentler voice.
Yeah.
I tell people to listen to it, but I'm also usually there guiding them, saying, okay, usually people on their first time, they'll sit in the water. I took a group out in a lake. I cut a hole in the lake in Wisconsin. And they usually sit in their first time for 13 to 15 minutes and loving every second of it.
That's awesome.
But it's so sometimes I have to just tell them, okay, I don't want you to lose too much heat.
Yeah, you got to get out now. So for people who, like we were just talking kind of before we got on the call, like it's 95 degrees where you are, it's like 100 in Texas. We don't necessarily have access to like a frozen lake. What are your favorite options for people who live in warmer climates to still have access to cold exposure? I've seen barrels. I've seen like the chest freezers that people convert. Some people just do the shower. Like what would you rank as the best options for people who might not have access to a frozen lake?
Sure. Cold exposure where you're dipping into a tub is the most widely studied. So you can get some on Amazon, just like cold spas for like $60. You can go to your, like a Tractor Supply, or get it if those are in your area, kind of in the rural areas, a stock tank. You can do it in a garbage can. But I like the full body immersion all at once, because then your body can start adapting and you have this consistency. And that's what's studied the most, because it's more controlled, right? You can actually control for the full body cold exposures. The next, I would say cold showers. Cold showers are a little bit more difficult, and they're different because you have to be moving around those showers all the time. You got to be exposing different parts, and then other parts are starting to warm up. So you just always have to keep in rotating or exposing yourself, which sometimes I think cold showers are actually a little bit harder than going and adapting.
I think so.
For
yeah.
sure.
I think it's harder.
You're continually going and exposing and having more cold shock. But just because of the scientific that they aren't studied as well, they're not well documented, you're going to have more people saying that they're going to recommend the full body exposure, because that's just where the metrics are. But there's nothing wrong with cold showers. And I liked if you had those ice barrels and those cold tubs that you can get on. Those are great if you have $1,200 to spend on it, right? Mm-hmm. I think that's a little out of my price range for doing a cold water immersion. I think you can get just the same effects of going into a cold bath with ice or a cold shower. All you really need is about 57 degrees to get these effects.
That was my other question is, what's the temperature and, how much ice would you put? How many pounds of ice would you put in like 100-gallon trough, for instance, to achieve the right temperature?
So I would, if you want the right temperature, I would get just kind of like those meat thermometers, those instant meat thermometers. Those work really good. I'm usually putting in about 40 pounds of ice into the water coming out of the bubbles into a nice bath. That's going to get you to about 50 degrees, 40, about 50 degrees, 48 degrees. I like it a little bit colder than the 57 degrees. Now, 57 degrees is where all those effects are coming. The 250% increase in dopamine. You're getting 560% increase in norepinephrine, or the adrenaline hormone, and you're getting a 350% increase in metabolism at 57 degree water, and learning how to adapt to it. So if you're worried about the water, because everyone's cold temperatures is different, right? And I think I'll give credit to the Huberman lab, because he's a doctor at Stanford of really trying to find your cold tolerance. And he gave some great advice that I have used for other people. Is when you're just trying this out, like go into a shower and turn it to the coldest until your brain's like, whoa, this is really cold. And then turn it a little bit colder until your body's like, I really want to get out, but I think I can stay in here safely. Right. And that's a good place to start to find where your cold tolerance is, and then gradually start making it colder as you can feel comfortable doing so. So you're not putting yourself in any cardiovascular shock response or danger of, being really, really cold or having some of these adverse effects. The whole point about this is to keep it as a positive experience. And because it changes the type of stress that you have, it reframes a traumatic experience into something that's positive, that you stress that is beneficial for growth and motivation and doing stuff, and a distress which increases your cortisol levels, and that's the stress that makes you sick. So that's kind of with the advice that's out there right now, is how to get started with cold exposure, finding that temperature. But if you get to 57 degrees and below, you're going to get everything out of that.
Okay. Yeah, that's really good to know. Because 57 degrees is like not too hard to achieve. That's definitely, right. I'm sure a cold shower is definitely a lot colder than that, or not necessarily a lot colder than that, but it's definitely colder than that. And I've gotten in I got like one of those $99 horse troughs from Tractor Supply Co. Filled it up with ice, and I got a little thermometer thing, and it was 50 degrees, and that was cold. And the first time I did it, it was a little bit of like a shock, but I acclimated like very quickly to it. I feel like 35 would be 100 times harder, but I was wondering if that was too warm, but it seems like that's probably like a good place for me. And then, you just got to ignore the bros on Instagram who are going to be like, well, you're not doing shit unless it's 35, buddy.
Exactly. And that's exactly correct. And I get this a lot, like, oh, you're not doing
cold bros.
It's not cold enough, or or how long can you do this for? And that's the biggest thing, is it's not about the length of time you're doing this. It's about getting your body to adapt to it, and just doing it consistently on a daily basis, or a couple times a week, and getting into the same practice. The Wim Hof method, which, all respect to Wim Hof, I didn't like how a lot of these people online are all about endurance, because I don't think that's not the point that I like to make of it. Is not how long you can stay in the water, but what are you getting out of it, and how is your body adapting to it? And as long as you're just doing it, you're getting the benefit.
Yeah. It's kind of like in weightlifting, like ego lifting. It's like, it doesn't like stop. Like, don't ask me how much I bench. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, it's about like your connection with your body, feeling good, being healthy, moving well. That's what matters. It's not like, you know what I mean? It's crazy how so many people can take anything to that point. The same people who are like competitive about how much weight, you know, it's like, they're like, how cold do you go for how long? Right. It's like, all right, man.
And there's a space for that. I like the cold bros. Like that's funny.
Yeah, we trademark that term.
Trademark cold bros. But there's if you want to do it if that's your goal is endurance, like sure, we can get your mind to an endurance mindset, and how do you push further. And I just haven't had a lot of people fulfilled by that. Like, because
are there adverse effects? So like, let's say someone sees something where they're like, you know, oh, I really need to do 35 degrees, and they do that. Like, are there any dangers to kind of like pushing it too far at first? Like, could you have heart issue? Like, is there any sort of like danger to doing this?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, if you're going into too cold of water without knowing what you're doing, and you have a cold shock experience, your heart, like there's a coronary spasm that you can have that if your heart's not able to go from, 70 to 170 and a huge spike, there's the potential of death. Now, that's pretty rare to have that, but it's something to think about. If you have a history of heart issues, a lot of people that push it end up pushing it into going into a pre-hypothermic state where they're having a real hard time rewarming themselves. Those are things where you can start having those different experiences where you're changing the stress from being something that's positive, and just like lifting weights, right? You can go too hard and then bicep pops. Well, if you go too hard, you're gonna have some negative effects of the hypothermia or blacking out.
This seems a lot like when the penguin plunge became popular. I just imagine the things that would happen, like what you're explaining right now, would be like the super unhealthy, overweight people who got challenged to do the penguin plunge, jump into 34-degree water without having ever done it before, and like weren't prepared for it, and something bad happens. The same way it would if that same person went into a gym and tried to deadlift 500 pounds.
Right. That's my only point about that, is it's like, when you're learning about this type of stuff, don't look what other people are doing and don't listen to other people. Like, go into it slowly, find what works for you, and slowly progress. That's really the way to do anything. And that's what you should do here too.
That's 100%. This is a personal experience. This is something you need to be gradual with it. And it's something of you against yourself. It's not about you against anybody else. And that's where people see the most progress in this, is when you learn how to adapt faster and let go and gratitude, and you're just using it as this beautiful place that you can learn about yourself. You end up going in the water for 10, 15, 20 minutes, and you don't even realize it. Mm-hmm. And so the key is, my biggest thing is, you can't fight the cold. The more you fight the cold, the colder that you get. And the only way through it is to let go and surrender. And when you surrender to that ego and you surrender to the cold and embrace it and just become a part of it, then you're able to go further than you ever thought imaginable.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm really loving where this is going. It's been very very practical, like a lot of really good takeaways here. My last question is, how often should we be doing this? I'm thinking about buying like 40 pounds of ice at a time. I'm like, okay, I need a bigger freezer. How often should we ideally be doing this? Especially when we're getting started.
I think the current literature says 11 minutes a week is kind of the thing. You get all these benefits of a week. Now
that's way less than I thought it was going to be.
Right. No, it for me too, which kind of, but I've kind of been on the extreme where I did it every day for 600 days and freezing cold water. But I tell you what, I think I wouldn't recommend anybody do it for 600 days in a row. The reason is because I think you can also become desensitized, right? You want to maximize the efficiency of these dopamine spikes, of these hormone spikes that are propelling you forward. Because if you start becoming desensitized to them, you start negating the effects. So going, a couple days and then, taking a couple day break and then doing it for a couple more days. I always recommend people start out at like doing a 10-day challenge. Do it for a 10-day cold water challenge, just to get your body acclimated to it and see how that starts to improve your life or your mindset or whatever your intention is. And I think it's really important, the cold water. But I think if you do it in spurts of cold exposure, you're going to benefit set, but you're still scheduling in some dedicated time to do that exposure.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's wild. It's way less than I thought it was going to be, but even like 2 sessions per week would make sense. And I get like cycling, it makes sense. Like we cycle all sorts of other things. We cycle ashwagandha, we cycle 5-HTP, like all these different things. Cycling your cold exposure makes a lot of sense. Well, man, this has been fascinating. This is like everything I wanted to know about cold water therapy. Travis, do you have any other questions?
No. Yeah, I think I'm good.
Yeah, this has been awesome. Great. Dude, I really appreciate you coming on, reaching out and wanting to get on the podcast to share this with us. I'm definitely going to start exposing myself to a little bit more cold water therapy. I think that would be really beneficial. I highly recommend the listeners do too. This has been like kind of a really good 101 to cold exposure. So I appreciate it, man. I know our listeners are going to want to find more about you. So why don't you give yourself a plug, man? Where can we find you?
Sure. Yeah. You can reach me at Cold Water Effect on Instagram. You can see kind of my 600, 700 day journey in Lake Michigan every single morning and some of those tips and tricks for you. And also at coldwatereffect.com, kind of get in touch with me regarding coaching, or if you want to try it yourself, or you just have any questions. I am there to help guide and educate and help you get to the next level of your life.
I love that, man. I love that. This has been really, really educational, really powerful. So I appreciate you sharing your story, giving us a little bit of an intro into cold water exposure and helping us just be better, struggle to strength, get into that cold water, embrace it. So I appreciate you, man. And thank you.
Embrace the stress.
Exactly. Embrace that stress, man. Thank you. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for everyone who tuned into another episode of the Struggle to Strength podcast. We will see y'all next week.